I, of course, was the happiest when I came out of my coma. I awoke to an old familiar feeling of chemicals depressing my nervous system. At first I was convinced that the talking black Scottish terrier and the prison had all been a dream. I was actually back in a horrible reality where I regularly got high to the point where I couldn't move. However, I soon noticed the sensation of handcuffs as jarred against such notions. I forced my eyes open to see where I was, but all I could make out was a mixture of blurred lights and dark shapes. It took a few minutes before my eyes adjusted and I was able to recognize that I was in a small, dark room surrounded by medical equipment, some of which was hooked right into me. I was trying to understand whether this was part of my high or whether I was actually in a hospital bed. Eventually my mind did land quite hard, I must add, and what had happened came crashing back to me. I remembered my hostage shenanigans, the final part of which was my getting shot. I tried to get up to have a look at myself, but my body was far too weak to let me move my arms up more than an inch. Also, my mind was much too hazy to focus and to check to find out how injured I actually was. The drugs in my system certainly didn't help. It wasn't until a couple of days later I was able to establish I had 51 stitched-up bullet holes riddled throughout my body. I suspected that the armed response unit were more than a bit trigger-happy. I suppose it is understandable as I was a high level of threat, but even with that in mind, 51 shots was going overboard. Clearly they wanted to make sure I was dead, but they very much failed. They probably were quite disappointed when they found out I had survived. This being a little thought that did bring me a modicum of joy. It was the first time I had ever been shot, I must say. It was something that I wasn't keen to repeat. Although I'm not one to generally complain about pain, 51 bullet holes is no easy thing to get over. None of this would have mattered if I had simply died, but clearly my body didn't get the memo that was the plan. Bedridden and restricted, there wasn't much else for me to do but think and meditate. Whenever hospital staff came in to check up on me, I pretended I was still unconscious. The doctor regularly checked up on me was quite the disturbing sort. He had a habit of talking to me and to himself during his rounds, what I guessed was a Danish accent. When I heard his straightforward and matter-of-fact manner with the nurses and myself, I felt I was more or less correct. On one of his rounds, he expressed an absolute disbelief that I had survived. He said that when they found me, it was as if I had gone into a state of catatonic hibernation. My breathing and heartbeat had become near deathly slow. He hypothesized that it was what saved my life. He then went on to say that my circulation slowed to the bare minimum to keep my brain oxygenated, while preventing as little blood leakage as possible. He also explained that whilst the bullets had hit vital organs that had caused only superficial or insignificant damage, other bullets seemed to have hit bone and then stopped, and the last remaining projectiles being lodged in my muscles. Another time, the same doctor had joked that he hoped that I would die soon, as my autopsy would be supremely fascinating. He was still in disbelief that my bones had only slightly fractured when they hit by the bullets, and that there were minimal signs of infection. He kept on saying with great disappointment that I was a spectacular specimen that required study, and it was a shame that I was due to be shipped off soon for a court hearing. I guess he wouldn't have said this much if he'd realised I was very much awake and only playing possum. Even with my supposedly miraculous ability to survive and heal, I was still a resident of a very broken body. Each night I tried moving, and each night all I could manage was to lift my arms an inch before my body gave in. During one of the days at the hospital, I heard what must have been a police officer ask the doctor when I'd be fit enough to be moved for the court hearing. The doctor bluntly replied that it depended on what state they wanted me in, and that if they wanted me to die in court, then they should just take me there and now. The police officer nervously chuckled that I had only needed to be conscious and that I was not likely to die in court. It was not long after that I was confronted about my acting. On the day this happened, I awoke to the beautiful smell of a sweet potato rosti, spinach, bacon, salsa, and poached eggs. My stomach whined at the smell. Unfortunately, it was but a few seconds later that I gave in and opened my eye just a smidgen for a little peek. There I saw a tall, skinny doctor with immaculately blonde, slick back hair. His bespectacled blue eyes were inquisitive and curious. They sat behind a long nose on a bright, clear, thin face. A polite, close smile came my way, and I got the feeling this was about as expressive as he could be. Sleeping Beauty awakes. You do realize I am a doctor, and it isn't difficult for me to tell if someone is pretending to be unconscious. Anyhow, that isn't important. I really wanted to talk to you about your body's amazing ability to heal. What you have is, how should I say, yes, a wonderful vehicle. The fact that you became conscious so early on is a miracle itself. If I had my way, I would cut you open right now and look at every cell in your body. The doctor casually intoned as he sat at the bottom of my bed. I saw the breakfast he had on a portable hospital dining table next to him. The doctor, with a little bemusement, looked at my wide-open eyes and then at the food. Next, he lazily cut into the sweet potato, rosti, bacon, and egg. Heaped a generous bite onto his fork, piled some spinach and salsa onto it, and then ever so slowly ate it. Each chew was precise, and his face showed that he savoured every morsel. I do not intend to flatter you, but I thought after what I read in the media stories, it was clear you were a man who enjoyed his food. Today was not the first time I used this knowledge to try to coax you out of your little game. I did initially try the standard hospital swill, but that of course didn't work, as it is terrible. I tell them all the time, but they do not change what they offer. Anyway, I had to cook up this meal myself in the hospital kitchen. Again, with the precision of a surgeon, the doctor distributed an equal amount of the various parts of the meal on his fork and took another bite. The only part of me that was capable of expressing the murderous rage I felt from him were my eyes. You are quite the fearsome one. I am glad to see that you have not suffered any brain damage, which further adds to how wonderful your vehicle is. I don't need to tease, but I get very bored with pretending to care for patients in this hospital. I am a researcher, you see. I've only come here as a locum doctor, so I can do some experiments. These are how you British say, hush, hush. I came across you through sheer good luck. He gave a little sigh. It is such a shame that you are so weak, as I'd like to see more of what your body can do. Look, I can even do this, and you cannot do a thing. The doctor pulled out a handcuff key and undid my cuffs. I am quite resourceful, he said whilst jangling the keys. I tried to get up with a rather simple plan in my mind. Kill the doctor and eat his food. Admittedly, I wasn't too sure in what order. I was able to get my arms and neck a couple of inches up before I fell back down. I wouldn't be disheartened by that attempt. You did a fantastic job to lift yourself up that much, especially as you should be dead right now. Barely a sign of infection, no major trauma to your organs, and you're not even brain dead after being shot 51 times. Yes, your vehicle is very splendid. I look forward to the day I get to tear you apart, piece by piece. I was just about able to rasp out. Your anger is understandable. I think I would be the same if I were in your shoes, but I am not. The doctor then went back to meticulously eating his breakfast whilst I watched impotently. My stomach angrily hissed, but it soon fell back into giving loud whines. It's rather surprising that you have a court date, especially as no one even knows who you are, since they can't find you on the systems. Oddly, one of your hostages did say he might know who you are, but he has suddenly disappeared. Anyhow, they think you must be a foreigner, given that you cooked Jamaican food when you took those hostages, and because you're a tanned man. I do wonder how people reach such high levels in their organizations with such simple thinking. The doctor stayed silent for a few seconds and stared at me absently. Anyhow, these idiots are unashamedly proud and powerful bureaucrats with insatiable lust to stick to their needlessly complicated processes. And they clearly think that for them to truly squash you, they need you in court to make it all above board. Apparently they have a judge all ready and waiting for whenever you're fit to go to a hearing so you can be officially sentenced and legitimately locked up. A part of me feels that they are a touch scared of you and see your weakened state as an opportunity to rid society of you for good, without the chance of you running wild like you did before. The doctor then stood up, looked me up and down, and gave a heavy sigh. Such a shame, though. It'd be a waste for you to be left to rot in some cell. Anyhow, I've delayed all this as long as possible and sent a request to the upper echelons of my employers to intervene. Hopefully they will take heed, so you can become reacquainted before it's too late, the doctor said with the faintest of smiles. He then deftly handcuffed me to the hospital bed again before he left the room. I thought the doctor had gone to alert the authorities and it was going to be that very day that I was to be wheeled out in front of a judge. Instead, it was 4 more anxiety-filled mornings before police and security came to take me away. During that time of waiting, as I had given up my charade, I opted to eat. Although it was infinitely more palpable than prison food, hospital food was one of the greatest displeasures I've ever experienced. My stomach only just about coped. Having eaten the swill and having a little bit more energy, I was pleased to see that my libido was still in working order. I noticed this when I was given a light sponge bath by the nurse. However, there wasn't much that I could do with regard to helping my proud fellow out, so I didn't have the romantic charisma to convince the portly and elderly nurse to befriend it. She carried on with her work as if it didn't even exist, something that I found quite hurtful. On the day that I was to be wheeled into court, the portly nurse came in to do her rounds. This time, after she completed her checks, she found a chair, sat down, and switched the television on. She watched a daft soap in which a gangster's daughter had fallen in love with a man who had been born a woman, and this man was also to become pregnant with a gangster's child after a drunken fumble. It was absurd, but the nurse looked enthralled. When it finished, she got up and left the room without switching off the television. More nonsensical shows came on, one after the other. I watched mindlessly as part of me was curious about what people actually found interesting about this world of TV. Eventually, just before I was about ready to fall asleep, the news came on. The initial headlines were about a frivolous squabble between the Prime Minister and one of her cabinet. The subsequent story was just as dreary as it was about some musician or actor who had died a wonderfully peaceful death. The story after that, however, was a damn sight more interesting. This one was about bumblebees. A group of scientists had provided near irrefutable evidence that certain pesticides were decimating the populations. Pesticides that were produced by the chemical company Oso had taken a continuous stream of evidence and years of decimation of the bees before neonicotinoids had finally been banned. Clearly there was going to be a repeat of the same lengthy process before this new pesticide was banned as well. This new evidence and the government opting to refuse to say anything at all about the subject was further confirmation of my belief. They clearly didn't want to change the status quo, and the only reason I could come up with was that they were somehow in cahoots. Within the news story, there was a backdrop of scientists providing reams of information pertaining to the potential consequences to humans. I, of course, didn't care about what happened to our species, but I became morose at the thought for those bumblebees dying because of greed. Such thoughts added fuel to an old rage. I wanted to burn and destroy all those barbarians. These feelings led me towards fantasies of becoming the pillager of all that was so-called civilized. In this realm I plundered and caused the streets to run red with blood. It was rather a melodramatic reverie, but I was far too weak at that moment in time to do anything else. Involuntarily, I refocused back onto the fact that the bumblebee was on the verge of tumbling into extinction. Guilt came out of nowhere and punched me right in the gut. I was winded and nauseous with the realization I had completely failed in the campaign I'd set out to accomplish. The thought that I'd become so callous and neglectful of something that I had supposedly loved tore at me. All that preparation and work wasted, and all because of my own fears and gluttony. I started to feel that it was ultimately my insatiable lust for food that got me into such difficulty. My accursed love of succulent meats. For one thing, not just any meats, but perhaps a boneless butterflied leg of lamb, also marinated perhaps in lemon, Greek oregano, salt, pepper, and garlic. The meats, seared to perfection, so seductively dripped juices and were cooked to a state where tender morsels fluttered off the bone and into my mouth, its savoury goodness hitting every perfect note of pleasure. My stomach let out pathetic moans and whines as images of this piece of lamb floated just out of reach in my mind. My desperation for such food almost reached a point of complete delirium, as I was also seeing hocks of Parma ham dangled above my head and whole roast ducks sitting on my belly. I forcibly stopped such torture as I realized it was stemming from the schemes of that tyrant below who wanted to take over. I had to focus on more pressing and more benevolent thoughts, such as how I was going to escape and kill every oh-so employee I could find. But I realized immediately that this was also just a fantasy brought on by the state of my body. The feelings of guilt swiftly returned and mercilessly took their time torturing my broken self. I was powerless, and I was to be sentenced that I could be thrown in some dungeon and left to rot. What made this even worse was that in this future I was destined to be a starved and guilt-ridden husk of a man. I knew I could wait until I had healed, and that eventually a window of opportunity might appear so that I could make my move to escape. Of course I'd be hunted down, and that prospect no longer deterred me, as there was the possibility that I could carry on with my campaign. However, such an opportunity might not come until many years had gone by. I simply didn't have that much time or patience. Every day I wasted, the closer the bumblebee came to extinction. Also, the thought of living on prison food for years sent terrible shivers down my spine. There was, of course, suicide, but guilt simply told me that wasn't going to happen. My emotions had got too much of a hold on me, and I knew they would not let me take such a way out. Their plan was to force me to rectify the mess I had caused and get back to my campaign. I was also able to tell my stomach was going to do whatever it could to ensure that I was going to eat the food that it thought it deserved. At first I thought there would be a civil war between these powerful internal factions, but they seemed to come to a quick and simple agreement over what they would make me do. I thought there was simply no way out of the situation. They felt differently. Before I'd even had a chance to contemplate things, they made me make my move. "Little dog, we need to talk about this deal," I meekly rasped out. Before I had time to regret my decision or to ridicule myself for even trying, I heard a sinister chuckle in my eerie voice that touched every octave. "Ha! Ha! Ha! That sounds like a wonderful idea, my dear boy. Do carry on," the voice said. I turned my head and saw the little dog sitting on a nearby chair. Its tail wagged and its tongue lolled out of its smiling mouth as the beast panted. "I'll agree to this deal, but only on one condition," I responded with a grimace as it hurt to speak. "Why, what is that, my dear boy?" "Don't call me boy," I was able to spit out. "Ho, ho, you're so wonderfully feisty. I'm sure we're going to have a terribly good time, my good chap." The canine laughed out before disappearing into thin air.